The night the invitation came, the city lights of Las Vegas shimmered like a sea of diamonds. Inside the grand showroom of the Sands Hotel, the crowd roared as Dean Martin leaned into the microphone with that relaxed smile the world had come to love. His voice was smooth, effortless, almost playful. He didn't just sing songs, he made them feel easy, as if life itself was just one long melody meant to be enjoyed. People laughed at his jokes. Glasses clinked. Cameras flashed. It was another successful night. But Dean felt something different. When the curtain closed and the applause faded, silence followed him back to his dressing room. He loosened his tie and stared at his reflection. The charm was still there. The tuxedo still perfect. The legend still alive. Yet deep inside, something was restless. A knock came at the door. "Mr. Martin," his assistant said gently, "you have a guest." Dean raised an eyebrow. At this hour, the door opened, and in walked a woman whose presence filled the room without effort. She wore no glittering gown, no diamonds. Just a simple dress and a calm strength in her eyes. It was Mahalia Jackson. Dean straightened up immediately. "Well now," he said softly, "this is a surprise." Mahalia smiled, warm and steady. "Good evening, Dean." She had been performing across town at a church revival, her powerful gospel voice lifting spirits instead of raising glasses. The two had met years ago at a charity event, where their different worlds had briefly crossed. Since then, they respected each other from afar, to giants of music walking very different roads. Dean poured two glasses of water instead of wine. Something about her presence demanded sincerity. "To what do I owe the honor?" he asked. Mahalia sat down, folding her hands calmly. "I came to invite you somewhere." Dean laughed lightly. "If this is about switching casinos, I'm under contract." She shook her head gently. "Not a casino." "At church." The word lingered in the air. Dean blinked. "At church, yes," she said. "This Sunday. I want you to sing." Silence. Outside, the faint sound of slot machines hummed like distant thunder. Inside, time stood still. Dean gave a half smile. "Mahalia, I sing love songs. Lounge songs. The kind people listen to after two martinis." She didn't react. "You sing from the heart. That's what matters." He looked down at his hands. "Church audiences expect something different, do they?" she asked softly. "Or do they expect honesty?" Her voice wasn't demanding. It wasn't persuasive. It was certain. Dean leaned back. "You know what people will say, yes. They'll think it's a joke, yes. They'll say Dean Martin doesn't belong in a church choir." Mahalia smiled again, but this time there was a quiet fire in her eyes. "Dean, God doesn't care about rumors." The words hit him harder than applause ever had. For years, Dean had built a public image of charming, carefree, always holding a glass. But the world didn't see the man who sat alone at night thinking about his childhood in Ohio. The boy who sang in small Italian gatherings before fame ever touched him. The son who once listened to hymns drifting from a neighborhood church window. Music had always been sacred to him. Somewhere along the way, the spotlight had made it feel commercial. Mahalia stood slowly. "I'm not asking for a performance," she said gently. "I'm asking for your voice." Dean swallowed. She moved toward the door but paused. "You once told me music should heal people." "I did." "Well," she said softly, "come help us heal." And then she left. That night, Dean didn't go to the after-party. Instead, he sat by the window of his hotel suite, watching the neon lights flicker. The city never slept. But his heart was wide awake. He imagined walking into a church filled with families. No smoke. No cocktails. Just wooden pews and open hearts. Would they judge him? Would he disappoint them? Or would something inside him finally feel whole? He picked up his phone and dialed his old friend from the Rat Pack days. "You're kidding," the friend laughed. "At church? You?" Dean smiled faintly. "Yeah. Nay, You planning to bring the martini to the pulpit? No, Dean replied quietly. I'm planning to bring myself. There was silence on the other end. You serious? Dean looked out at the glowing city once more. For the first time in a long time, he said, I think I am. Sunday arrived faster than expected. The church wasn't grand or famous. It stood humbly on a quiet street, sunlight warming its brick walls. A simple wooden cross hung above the entrance. Dean sat in his car for a long moment before stepping out. No tuxedo. No spotlight. Just a plain dark suit. As he walked toward the door, whispers began. That's him. Is that really Dean Martin? Mahalia stood near the altar, her presence calm as ever. When she saw him, she didn't look surprised. She simply nodded, as if she had known all along he would come. He approached her quietly. I don't know any gospel songs, he admitted. She smiled. Sing what's true. The congregation filled the pews. Families. Elderly couples. Children swinging their legs nervously. No flashing cameras. Just expectation. Mahalia stepped forward first. Her voice rose like sunlight breaking through clouds. It filled every corner of the church, powerful, pure, and shaken. Dean felt something shift inside him as he listened. Then she turned to him. It's your turn. His heart pounded louder than any Vegas crowd. He walked to the front. No microphone tricks. No orchestra. Just silence waiting. He closed his eyes. And instead of a lounge classic, instead of a playful tune, Dean Martin began to sing something simple, an old hymn he remembered from childhood. His voice wasn't flashy. It wasn't theatrical. It was honest. And in that small church, something extraordinary happened. People didn't see a celebrity. They saw a man. A man standing vulnerably before them, offering not charm, but sincerity. An elderly woman began to cry softly. A child stopped fidgeting and listened. Mahalia's eyes glistened with quiet approval. Dean felt his voice tremble at first, then steady. The notes carried something deeper than performance. They carried memory, humility, and truth. When he finished, there was no immediate applause. Just silence. Sacred silence. And then, slowly, the congregation stood. Not cheering. Not shouting. Just standing in respect. Dean felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Mahalia stepped beside him and whispered, You see. He nodded, unable to speak. Outside, there were no neon lights. No slot machines. No headlines. Just a clear sky above a simple church. Dean Martin had been invited to sing. What he chose was not spectacle. He chose authenticity. And in doing so, he discovered that sometimes the loudest applause comes from the quietest rooms. By Monday morning, the story had traveled far beyond that quiet street. Someone had taken a photo inside the church. It showed Dean Martin standing beside Mahalia Jackson, no spotlight, no glass in his hand, just a hymn book and a lowered gaze. The image appeared in newspapers and gossip columns before noon. The headlines were polite, but the tone underneath was curious. Dean goes gospel, from Vegas to the pulpit. Phone calls began before breakfast. His manager sounded uneasy. Dean, what exactly happened in that church? I sang. Dean answered calmly. You sang what? Ahem. There was a long pause. You know this could confuse your audience. Dean leaned back in his chair. Or maybe it could remind them I'm human. By afternoon, radio hosts were joking about it. Some said it was a publicity stunt. Others suggested he was trying to reshape his image. A few critics implied that entertainers should stay in their lane. Dean listened quietly but did not respond publicly. He remembered the silence inside that church. He remembered how different it felt from the applause at the Sands in Las Vegas. There, applause was loud and immediate. In the church, respect had been quiet and lasting. That difference stayed with him. 2 days later, Mahalia called. "I hope you're not overwhelmed," she said gently. Dean gave a soft laugh. "I've survived tougher crowds. You don't owe anyone an explanation," she continued. "I know, but the world will ask for one." Dean walked to his window. Outside, the city looked the same as always. Cars moved. Lights blinked. Life went on. "I didn't go there to make a statement," he said. "I went because you asked me to, and because you wanted to," Mahalia replied. He paused. She was right. Later that week, Dean returned to the Sands showroom. The band was ready. The audience was full. The lights came up as usual. He stepped onto the stage to familiar applause. For the first 10 minutes, everything felt normal. Jokes, smooth transitions, effortless notes. But halfway through the set, someone in the crowd shouted, "Sing that church song." Laughter rippled across the room. Dean stopped for a moment. He could brush it off with humor. He could turn it into a clever line and move on. That was what people expected. Instead, he looked at the audience calmly. "You know," he said, "I've been singing my whole life. In clubs, on stages, in studios. Last Sunday, I sang in a small church. It wasn't so different." The room quieted. "Music is music," he continued. "If it's honest, it belongs anywhere. No jokes. No sarcasm. Just truth." He signaled the band softly and began the same hymn he had sung in church. The arrangement was gentle, almost stripped down. No dramatic build. No theatrical ending. Some people shifted in their seats. A few listened carefully. Others lowered their glasses. When he finished, the applause came slowly but steadily. It was not the explosive reaction of a party crowd. It was thoughtful. Backstage, a fellow performer approached him. "You're taking a risk," the man said. "Maybe," Dean replied. "You built your name on charm and ease." Dean smiled faintly. There's nothing easy about being real. That night, he did not attend the usual after-show gathering. Instead, he drove alone. The city lights felt less blinding than before. He realized something important. The invitation to sing had not been about religion or image. It had been about courage. The courage to step outside expectation. The courage to let people see a different side of him. The following Sunday, he received another message from the same church. Not a request to perform. Just a handwritten note. "Thank you for reminding us that faith and talent can walk together." He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket. The world outside would continue to talk. Critics would continue to analyze. Some fans would approve. Others would question. But inside, Dean felt steady. He understood now that his voice did not belong to a casino, a contract, or a reputation. It belonged to the part of him that had once sung as a boy without fear of labels. And that part, he realized, had been waiting for a long time. Part 2 ends not with applause or headlines, but with a quieter victory. Dean Martin had stepped into unfamiliar territory and chosen sincerity over safety. The real challenge, however, was still ahead. The public reaction slowly settled, but something deeper had already begun inside Dean Martin. For years, he had mastered the art of appearing untouched. On stage in Las Vegas, he was relaxed, unbothered, always smiling. The glass in his hand, the easy laughter, the smooth transitions between songs, it was all part of a carefully shaped image. But after that Sunday in the small church with Mahalia Jackson, the image felt thinner. One evening, after a long show, Dean sat alone in his dressing room. The applause had been strong. The crowd had laughed. The performance had been flawless. Yet he felt tired in a way he could not explain. He looked at the mirror again, the same mirror he had stared into the night Mahalia first invited him. The tuxedo was perfect. The bow tie straight. But his eyes carried questions. Was he living honestly, or just comfortably. The invitation to sing in church had not changed his career overnight. He was still under contract, still part of major productions, still associated with the glamorous circle of the Rat Pack. But internally, something had shifted. A few days later, he received another call from Mahalia. "I'm not asking you to sing this time," she said warmly. "Just come visit." Dean agreed. The church was quieter than before. No large crowd. Just a weekday rehearsal. A small choir practicing simple harmonies. No cameras, no rumors. He sat in the back pew and listened. The singers were not professionals. Some were off-key, some nervous. But every voice carried intention. They were not performing to impress. They were singing to mean something. Mahalia joined him after rehearsal. "You look thoughtful," she said. "I am," Dean replied. He paused before speaking again. "I built my career on making things look effortless. People like that version of me. But sometimes I wonder if I hid behind it." Mahalia listened carefully. "Hidden from what?" she asked. "From seriousness. From vulnerability. From letting people know that I care more than I joke." She nodded slowly. "There is nothing wrong with joy, Dean. But joy is strongest when it stands on truth." Her words stayed with him long after he left the church. Back in Las Vegas, his schedule intensified. More shows. More appearances. Television specials were being discussed. Expectations grew. Some producers advised him quietly to avoid unexpected shifts in image. One night, after a particularly loud show, a young stagehand approached him backstage. "Mr. Martin," the young man said nervously, "I was at that church service. My mother made me go." Dean smiled lightly. "Did she drag you there?" "Yes. But I just wanted to say something." Dean waited. "When you sang that hymn, my mother cried. I've never seen her cry like that." She said it reminded her of her childhood. The young man swallowed. "I didn't know you could sing like that." Dean felt something tighten in his chest. "Neither did I," he answered honestly. That moment mattered more than any review. Later that night, alone again, Dean made a quiet decision. He would not abandon his style. He would not pretend to become someone else. But he would no longer limit his voice to expectation. At his next major performance, he adjusted the set list. Near the end of the show, after the laughter and the classics, he paused. "I want to try something different tonight," he said calmly. The room grew attentive. He spoke briefly about how music has many homes, stages, studios, even small neighborhood churches. Then he sang a slower, reflective piece. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just sincerely. The audience did not resist. In fact, they listened more closely than before. Dean realized something powerful in that moment. People were not afraid of depth. They were afraid of change. But if change was honest, they would follow. The private battle inside him began to settle. He no longer felt divided between the entertainer and the man who stood in church without a spotlight. They were the same person. One did not cancel the other. Mahalia's invitation had not pulled him away from his world. It had simply widened it. And for the first time in years, Dean Martin felt that his voice, whether in a grand showroom or a quiet chapel, truly belonged to him. Time passed, but the Sunday in that small church did not fade from memory. For Dean Martin, it had become more than a story people whispered about. It had become a quiet turning point, not dramatic, not loud, just steady. His career continued successfully in Las Vegas. The theaters were still full, the contract still strong. He still walked on stage with confidence and charm, but something inside him had settled into clarity. One evening, months later, he received an invitation again from Mahalia Jackson. This time it was not for a regular service. The church was organizing a community fundraiser to support struggling families. They wanted music, not headlines. Dean did not hesitate. When he arrived, there were no reporters waiting. No rumors. Just volunteers setting up folding chairs and children running between tables. The air carried the simple smell of coffee and homemade food. Mahalia greeted him with the same calm smile. "You came," she said. "You didn't think I would," he replied gently. Inside the hall, there was no stage. Just a small platform and a piano that had clearly seen many years. Dean looked at it for a long moment. "This is perfect," he said quietly. The evening began with local singers. Some were nervous, some bold. When it was Dean's turn, he stepped forward without introduction. No grand announcement. No spotlight. He spoke briefly. "Music has given me a life I'm grateful for," he said. "Tonight, I want to give it back." He sang a simple song about hope. Not a hit from the casinos. Not something designed for applause. Just a melody that carried warmth. The room grew still. He noticed an elderly man in the front row holding his wife's hand. A young mother swaying gently with a child asleep on her shoulder. Volunteers standing at the back, listening quietly. When he finished, the applause was soft but sincere. No whistles. No cheers. Just gratitude. Afterward, instead of leaving quickly as he often did after shows, Dean stayed. He spoke with families. He laughed with children. He helped move chairs. A local pastor approached him. "Thank you for using your voice this way," the pastor said. Dean nodded. "It's the same voice. Just finally understood where it belongs." Later that night, as he drove back toward the glowing lights of the strip, he realized something important. He had once believed that success meant being unforgettable on stage. Now he understood that success could also mean being meaningful off it. The world still knew him for charm and smooth songs. That would not change. He would always be the entertainer people loved. But he no longer felt trapped by that identity. Mahalia had not asked him to change who he was. She had simply invited him to be whole. In the months that followed, Dean quietly supported more community events. Not for publicity. Not for image. He rarely spoke about it publicly. The impact was not measured in headlines but in moments. One evening, before a major performance, he stood backstage listening to the crowd's growing excitement. Years earlier, that sound alone would have defined everything for him. Now, it was only part of the picture. He adjusted his jacket, took a slow breath, and walked toward the stage lights. The audience rose with applause, just as they always had. He smiled, but it was different now. Not rehearsed. Not guarded. Confident. Because he knew something the audience did not. He knew that beyond the glamour, beyond the expectations, beyond the carefully shaped image, he had made a simple but lasting choice. He chose sincerity over safety. He chose purpose over perception. And in doing so, he discovered that the most powerful performance of his life had not happened under bright lights in Las Vegas. It had happened in a quiet church, when he sang without trying to impress anyone at all. That choice did not end his career. It strengthened it. Because when a voice carries truth, it does not matter where it is heard. It will always find its way home.